Welcome to the Attack Action Podcast,
where we talk about friendship, fun times, and most importantly, flesh and blood. Here are your hosts, Taylor and Isaac.
Hello, Attactioneers, and Isaac. What's up, dude?
Welcome to 2022.
The future. That was me transforming because I'm a robot now.
And because we're not fucking around anymore.
100% because of that.
I don't know why I said that. We definitely still are.
We're not fucking around anymore. Sorry, I have to adjust my mic now that we're actually recording. Okay.
That's best done on air.
Yeah, totally. Well, this is how we do it.
This is pretty standard start to our podcast. Welcome, everyone.
Yeah, welcome. So I hope you enjoyed that new intro. We spent long nights figuring out how to do that, so hopefully it's excellent.
Yeah, and the iambic pentameter doesn't go over most of your heads.
Yeah, and the in-between haiku we got in there as well. And if you pair that with the outro, it's a sonnet. Okay, so on today's episode, we're going to kind of talk about some gameplay tips and lessons and just things we have picked up in our flesh and blood journey to help you, the listener, jumpstart your conquest in the Pro Quest or Pro Tour. What's coming up first?
Nice.
Pro Quest.
Well, Pro Quest rhymes with
Conquest. Yeah. Okay. Hell
Great
yeah.
job.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking about this episode in terms of like a bonus addition to our previous gameplay or deck building episodes where we're going to kind of free flow discuss maybe some of the more intricate gameplay lessons that we've learned.
Yeah, or some like common things we see that still happen or maybe that aren't as talked about as much between players and that sort of thing.
Right.
But first, before we get anywhere, we have our news segment. So do we have anything on the news, Isaac?
Yeah, well, I don't know if any of you have seen this. I don't know if you've heard about this.
It's a big deal.
Brendan Patrick got a haircut.
Oh, my God. It's incredible. Yep. So now he's no longer the blonde Falcon of the South that we know him to be. He's just a Joe Schmo now.
Just fast and light. Totally. Watch out, everyone.
Yeah, slide into his DMs and ask him for selfies, for sure.
There's been a lot of news lately, but now we don't have time for any of the other stuff with that headlining our podcast.
Yeah, exactly. So also starting out this new year, we would love to more consistently do a listener mail segment, and we have committed to being better at curating and saving those questions and then answering them. So if you have anything you would like us to discuss at the top of the show, go ahead and slide into our DMs or what have you and shoot us whatever questions you have, and we'd be happy to answer them.
Well, since it's the new year, Taylor, I was just wondering, do you have any flesh and blood New Year's resolutions or revelations you'd like to discuss?
Wow, this is not on the list.
No, I think you deleted it, but I wanted to talk about it anyway.
I don't have any, I think I would have been clear on other podcasts or reaction steps that we've done about kind of where I want to be for this year in flesh and blood, but I have some personal resolutions for regular lifetime. If you want to hear about those.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So since the pandemic and since I started coaching college basketball and back to doing high school stuff now, which shout out to my basketball team. We're undefeated at home and we're tied for first place in league right now.
Which is our hometown school.
Yeah.
So
totally.
Good job.
big game next week on Thursday. If we win, we're solidly in first place.
Nice.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm pretty psyched. Anyway, I've just been a little bit too busy with other stuff, pandemic, etc. So one of my resolutions for this year is to like spend more time outside, which historically me and you have been pretty avid like campers, rock climbers, you know, backpacking and that sort of thing. In just the last two kind of fair weather seasons, I haven't done a good job of that. So that's one of my resolutions is to have more adventures outside.
Nice.
Yeah. What about you?
It's a good one.
Do you have any real life or flesh and blood life?
I do. I hadn't prepared real life ones, but I think my real life resolution is to be a bit more focused with my time when I want to be, right? But sometimes I get a little bit, you know, if I have too many projects with too many sub projects and to-do lists, it can be a little bit overwhelming and I won't get quite as much done as I had wished. So just allocating my time and focusing on one thing to accomplish that and kind of pushing the other stuff out of my mind and being happy with that is
finish stuff rather than start stuff.
Yeah.
Cool. Like your house.
Yeah. Well, yeah. We're almost there. In Flesh and Blood, I would like to become a better pitch stacker.
Oh, nice.
I never played Chain.
Yeah.
And I'm okay at pitch stacking, right? I can pitch a blue Wrecker Romper and an Alpha Rampage and a Barraging and a blue, but I'm not always sure if they will all show up in the same hand or be split. And or pitching multiple hands together, or subsequent hands, or, you know, like in Kano, drawing the perfect hand and then setting up a double blazing. Some of these like plays as the game moves forward are a little bit beyond me, especially like specifically counting my deck and remembering every turn to manage how many cards I use or get rid of or pitch to, maintain the sequence of cards I need.
Nice.
Which is, it's tough. It's a high skill maneuver, and I hope to get better at that.
Yeah, totally. I can't remember when it was like definitely slightly before I started playing Chain. I started thinking about, I think it was actually in Monarch, which I guess is slightly, it's like when we started playing Monarch Limited is when I started thinking more heavily about like what cards I pitch stack and that sort of thing, you know? Especially because of like, you had to go up against like Prism and stuff like that. And I guess, yeah, with like limited Chain, you still want to pitch stack and that sort of thing. So, and with all of those classes, you really needed to make sure you kept in like some sort of class threat or whatever. So
yeah,
I think that's when I remember being like, I need to just start thinking about this every game I play, even whether or not I get there. And I think I actually took the tip from Brendan Patrick, who was like, I think said like at the end of every game, just flip over your deck and look at the hands you pitched and see how well you did. You know?
Nice.
Yeah.
So it's a good habit.
Yeah. Thanks, Brendan. Love the haircut.
I also had a bit of a revelation I was thinking about in terms of like, I don't know, my mental state for the new year. I was listening to an interview with Tarek Patel right after Nationals, and he said something that was really interesting to me. He said that as he was playing his Briar deck in the tournament, I believe, he kept getting in trouble because he would play out his last attack action after one more embodiment, rather than arsenaling it and increasing the consistency of his next hand by having 5 cards and guaranteeing he had an attack or maybe a non-attack sometimes. And I just picked up that deck a little while ago, and I mean, to me that line was like instantly obvious, right? Like, I'm like, no way am I going to swing Rosetta or play this out just for one more embodiment. Shoring up my next hand is like the way to go here, almost no matter what, unless I'm really reading my opponent and there's like some good reason to play out this card. And I just bring this up because like Tarek is an extraordinary player, right? I'm not like mentioning this to, rag on him or anything, but he's such a good player. And it kind of struck me because I guess that particular line or strategy, was maybe more obvious to me right away than to him. And it just got me thinking, like, I guess each of us have our own strengths and weaknesses in this game. And it just made me want to think about what are my strengths and weaknesses, right? So like maybe identifying that line is a strength of mine. So what are my weaknesses? What ways can I, change my thought process, or processes and get better at this game, through deliberately changing my habits, right? Or like identifying in which ways am I like a subpar player and how can I get better at that rather than just getting reps or learning this character better. Are there like certain more broad ways in which I can improve? That makes sense?
Yeah, that totally does make sense. And is, I think, a salient point and was well articulated,
Thanks.
Yeah, I think one of our big things is we've changed up a few new members in our testing group, not because we like kicked out some people who we thought sucked or whatever, but we just needed some people to be a bit more consistent so we could accomplish our goals and that sort of thing. Won't say who in case they don't want to be.
This is all top secret. Don't ask.
Yeah, totally. But so part of that is like, getting to talk to some new people about the game and different play styles and that sort of thing is I think initially been really helpful and been reinvigorating for sure. A small change of scenery that way. Shout out to our testing group. Y'all are the best. I'm really excited. Always on the Discord talking about stuff, which is really just gets me psyched. Okay. Anyway, we'll get into a lot more philosophy here pretty soon. Great job, Isaac, as always. We're sitting really far away from each other now, and so it's like, I don't know, it's a different vibe. There you go, Mike Popovich. There's your How's the Podcast going for the episode. So with the introduction of Everfest coming up, Isaac, what firstly are you looking for out of this set?
So, of course, there's a number of things. Weapons. Ninja has a lot of cards that are not played, even that came out of Crucible. Azalea could use a number of things. I could go on and on about, many cards. But the one thing that I am looking for most, I think, is another maybe go tall card for Wizard, right? Because I find when you play a go wide strategy or a low null rune, or even if they have some null rune, but you're going wide, there's many kind of intricate lines you can play. And when you play a go tall package, it's a very complex character. There are many ways to attack them, but it seems a bit linear, like you're stir forked or stir voltic or stir aether into something. All kind of involve stir. And it's, one of the only ways to like pump your attacks and really go tall. And, I know there's a couple other tricks or ways, but just some other strategy or card or way to combat, null rune for fatigue.
Right.
Or whatever, I think would make it a bit more interesting than just like try to set up stir forked blazing, remembrance some of those back that you had to block with and played, and then like repeat and hope you draw them in the right sequence or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's my hope. What are you mostly looking for out of Everfest?
Well, there are a few characters that have kind of a lack of depth to their card pool, and it's kind of like I guess it's kind of the light heroes out of Monarch. I don't really play Prism, and maybe there's a bit more depth to that card pool, but it doesn't really seem like it at face value. But so for something like Bolton, Raiden, the true way to play the character, I think it's just it's such a fun deck with a cool weapon and that sort of thing. But it's just like you kind of got to just build it this one way and do this one thing, and you can kind of feel how, like with Beacon of Victory, that there's some kind of cool extra combos you can do in there other than just like charge your soul, do an attack, give it go again, attack with your sword, give it go again, do another attack, you know? So that you could have maybe this like aggro combo build or something like that. I don't know. But you know, that's not like a Sabres build or whatever. So that's just my example for giving some certain characters or some certain forgotten cards kind of a revitalization or just added depth, right? That makes sense. I'm trying to think of another example of something that's like has kind of, I mean, I guess all of the talented heroes a little bit. I think Ice Lexi has them, or just Lexi has maybe the most flexibility in the builds, but like, you know, Oldheim is pretty much Iceheim. What does he look like if he's Earthheim? You know, stuff like that. Just a little bit more depth. But weren't we talking about this where it was like they're still really good, those characters, you know?
Yeah, I guess my thought in that department, because I think you're right, like Bolton seems like a lot of fun, but very linear to be good with. And then I kind of complain that Ice Lexi feels really linear because you have to play quite a lot of ice arrows and ice cards to gain that benefit. And there's like only 2 good ice arrows and some more, I guess, ice arrows or flexibility would be really nice. You know, but then I thought about it a bit more, and like, to be honest, the flexibility is maybe medium in that deck, or there's like several lines of play and some like tricks and shifts you can do. So while I would love more talent cards and, you know, more lines in that department, it does feel like that particular class is like interesting enough, you know. I would rather see, maybe Bolton get some more cards, or, you know, Ninja even, or something like that. So as linear as some of the talented characters feel, like Leviah, the lines of play you can find or create with a character kind of make up for its limited card pool sometimes. Mm-hmm. But with other characters, a bit less.
Yeah. So that's what I would like to see. Yeah. Is just an expansion of the kind of depth in which we can play characters, right?
Yeah.
Because your character, I mean, probably the majority of players are very loyal to a certain hero or a certain class. And so if you could play those in a multitude of ways, that would be just like best for your player base, you know? Rather than doing the like, well, if you like this style of play, pick this color type of thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Anyway, that's all I got. Let's get into our main topic.
All right. Well, first up, we're going to talk about preparation and testing a little bit.
Yeah.
So sometimes I feel when you're approaching a new season or trying to nail down your goals in testing, sometimes it's a bit overwhelming to try to think about, okay, how do I beat all of the top decks in the meta, right? So talk to me a little bit about the best way to approach testing.
Well, you should... So this comes with a caveat, right? So like Everfest is coming out, and then you have like 2 weeks before the first ProQuest. So you don't really have a ton of time, right? So if you haven't been testing and you're waiting to start once the set is released and then do all your testing, then you maybe have a little bit less time to break things down into separate parts. So it's like you should try to tackle one specific thing at first rather than trying to be like, I'm just going to try to find the best deck that breaks the whole meta that we currently have, right? That's like a huge task and would be really hard to find a deck that just like in 2 weeks plays really good into the Guardians and the Rune Blades and could beat Ice Lexi, Lightning Lexi, you know, or whatever you think the kind of top decks are. So just setting kind of specific goals and potentially starting with like already a known deck, you know, be like, okay, I'm going to see what cards have come in from this set and that I can add to my existing deck to maybe shore up some of my bad matchups. Let's just start there. And then like taking notes, making sure you're getting data from yourself and your opponent, and that sort of thing. I don't want to talk too much about all of that. Give you a chance to add in there.
Sure. I would add, you know, time management or like realistic time awareness or something is pretty important, at least for me. So say you have a month to test for something and your group meets twice a week, but half the time you're on a gauntlet deck. You're not getting to test out your radical new idea. So that's just one round of testing per week for you. So you get in 3 games. 3 times 4 is 12 rounds total before your event, which sounds like a lot less testing than when you say, I have a month to test, right?
Right, yeah.
So I would try to look at it realistically like that, and then you line up, okay, well, I know I have these 2 good matchups. This one's pretty good in theory, and this hero isn't highly represented. So we're just going to set out, I'm gonna test into Bravo 3 matches. See if I can make some tweaks, see how it goes. And then the next week, I mean, of course, this is fluid, right? Depending on how that goes, I may need to test a bit more into Bravo, or then maybe I'm switching to Oldheim or whatever, right? But just being aware that even in this scenario of twice a week for a month, it might only be like 10 rounds total,
right?
Is pretty, I think, I don't know, just a pretty good thing to be aware of in terms of like keeping yourself in line. Because, I mean, we've, you know, long time ago, but we've sat down before for like 2 days straight and been like, okay, well, you know, we'll just get 4 matches into each hero or whatever. And then it's like, well, actually, wait a minute. If each is an hour long and we're only here for a day and a half, you know, then you didn't get in half your testing. In. So that would be my hot take.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And again, I would just like to reiterate, like, note taking and talking with your opponent after the match is really important. Like, you know, even if you don't have a testing group and it's just at locals, just try to have a discussion with the person you played. Like, even if they say like, I don't know, just try to further be like, oh, well, remember when I came at you with this play or whatever, can you remember like what you were thinking or how that felt or something like that? And just making notes about that thing, because you can then reference those, or later in the week when you have time to sit down and maybe make some tweaks, you can kind of, you know, access that hard drive and be able to more clearly remember what maybe your thoughts were about changes or what went really well, etc.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point, because I mean, an example comes to mind of how the impact of some cards is less easy to read than others. Yeah. So I always struggled with increase the tension, which does not allow your opponent to play defense reactions from hand to that arrow. But you never see the effect of this card, right? So it costs 1 to pump an arrow for 3, which is a bit expensive. And I would never be able to weigh the impact of that card versus not having it unless I asked my opponent. Yeah. You know, when I played this card twice in this game, was that really impactful? Or did you have a defense reaction? Did it really muck up your turn? Or did it not really matter much?
Right.
So, yeah, great point.
And then this is something I kind of said earlier, in which might be obvious, but as the hero pool increases, it becomes increasingly harder to pick up new heroes that maybe you're not familiar with. So initially when sets come out, I mean, you might want to think about trying to just add on to some heroes decks that you're more familiar with, right? Rather than, like, for example, I was like really excited about Lexi after Tails came out, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna pick up Ranger now for kind of really the first time, and we're gonna be slanging arrows left and right. But really I was like, but these classes I know how to play, I can explore a bit more. So I think I'm gonna do that instead, because of just the amount of time it'll take me to like catch up to somebody like Isaac in terms of play. But thankfully I have Isaac as a huge resource, and he can, like, you know, cut 6 months off of my my learning curve or something, you know. So
totally. And the other way around, like, we each bring something to the table.
Yeah.
Like, you're very familiar with Viserai, and I would be starting from scratch.
Yeah.
Rune Blade math or Rune Chant math is kind of hard.
Totally. We had some earlier games today, and I was like really in the tank on if I have one rune chant here and I get 2, what does that do? You know? Yeah. Stuff like that.
I had another thing I just thought of based on our last episode, because I kind of wanted to clarify this a bit. This was how I explained this last time was kind of bugging me a bit. So when we were talking about our separate deck building strategies, right? How do you put it? You describe my strategy as...
You're like a bit more holistic than I am. Like, you do it by feel, and I'm like, I need quantifiable data points to then make my decision.
Right. Yeah. And you said I like throw a bunch against the wall and see what sticks.
Oh, yeah, that too.
Yeah. Which is, I think, true to a certain degree, but I wanted to clarify that because I'm like certainly not endorsing just playing radically until you accidentally find a line. What I'm talking about by exploring new lines is something like when we were playing earlier today, right? I played one game like pretty tight, just how I would normally play it. And then I played another game. I was on Kano. And I mean, there's the classic cards you want to arsenal, right? Like, you know, Cindering Foresight or Snapback, or these cards that are like very good out of arsenal and very easy to play. Right. But then this game, you know, I was like, well, you know, shit. Oh, what if I arsenal this Reverberate, right? The game's winding down. And what if I pay for Storm Striders into Reverberate, and then it'll allow me to play something from hand in addition to my top decking? You know, is this a good line to explore? And it turned out that's just one data point. Maybe it'll prove that it is good in the future. But in this particular instance, it was nice because it allowed me to play a card from hand. But it was kind of a card-hungry play for not amplifying my damage or really being a core part of my final combo. So I think that, you know, what I learned there is like, you know, even an Aether Flare or a Blazing or a Snapback or a Gaze or something would actually be better in Arsenal than that Reverberate. So I tried a new line that I had not tried before, and I kind of learned something from it, but it was still like pretty structured, right? Yeah. Like I had an idea of the new line I was exploring while trying to keep the rest of the game fairly tight, right? So... well, I think I am like quite a bit looser in testing than you are for sure. I would caution you still need to stick to a plan.
Well, it's like,
you know,
when you have an initial deck build, you're like, oh, here's this brand new idea, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Then you're just like, just shotgun this stuff all out there. That's what I more mean, like,
gotcha.
Starting from scratch. Yeah.
Gotcha.
No, I think that's good. Yeah. But then, so for me, just for an example of how we would differ, I would be like, interesting. And I would like make a note of that play and try to replicate it again in a different match. Make a note of it.
Which is much better. Because I made a mental note and may forget.
Yeah. And just try it again and be like, whatever. Yeah. Interesting. Pretty interesting. Anyway,
I do have one final point on this topic I would like to say. I find when I'm testing or even just goldfishing, if I come up, like especially say you're just goldfishing and feeling things out, if I come up against like a bad hand or a difficult problem to figure out with a bad hand, my brain wants to go, I'm tired. This actually doesn't matter right now. I'm just going to shuffle it up and try again. But then I stop and I make myself work out the problem with this terrible set of cards. Like, how much does it block for? Can I still eke out something? And by making myself actually sit there and work it out, even though I'm not really interested in this stupid issue, then sometimes I do like find like, oh, okay, this is actually like, you know, a decent line, and I like sorted through it and I figured it out. I don't know if like everybody does that, but sometimes I'm just like, well, that was dumb. I hope I don't draw that hand again. And then I move on, but I try not to stop and make myself actually look through it.
Yeah, I think I do less goldfishing now, or it depends on the deck, right? Just in terms of like kind of an initial like, oh, here's the 60. What are 4 cards? 4-card hands kind of look like, you know, and go through the deck a couple of times. Because some decks like if you're doing OTK Viserai, like you really need an opponent across from you to figure out how you're going to like sculpt your hand from turn to turn, right?
Definitely.
Because it's not always just like, okay, I just have 4 cards that don't make rune chance. I'm just going to throw those in the bin and draw 4 new ones. Sometimes it is, but it's just best against an opponent. So as I become better at Flesh and Blood, I realize that like the intricacies in which the game is played are really hard to simulate in your brain, not having an opponent, you know? Because it's like way different if I were to just be building an engine, right? Like in certain card games, you're just like, oh, cool. Like I play down my resource card, and then now I have some few more resources. Now I can pay for this many things, and then next turn I can put down another resource card, and you know, etc. So the game doesn't lend itself as well to goldfishing with certain archetypes.
Yeah, I agree. You definitely don't learn very much from goldfishing.
Yeah.
I tend to just do it a couple times when I have a new idea, and I do it to see ratios and kind of the synergy of how hands will play out. You know, like how many hands brick versus how many hands don't. How many hands function if I have to block with X amount of cards or whatever. So just the initial feel I sometimes play out a bit.
Right. But, gotcha.
Well, do you have any other New Year's notes on testing or preparation?
New Year's notes. Well, I mean, also if you don't have a testing group and you're trying to like get better at the game, you should try to like get a buddy and start testing and that sort of thing. You know? Oh, this is one thing we're doing better is like having like a bit more comprehensive sideboard guide and play guide to decks, so that like even though you potentially are not a master at the deck, you could at least like jumpstart your play level up to like 65% efficiency against your opponent. So then that's like a little bit more useful if that's not like your main deck, which seemed obvious that we should have been doing that before, but whatever.
I think before we had less people on less gauntlet decks.
Yeah.
Totally.
And
now that we're shifting a bit more, it's a bit more pertinent.
Definitely. All right, let's move into some kind of gameplay, not tips, but lessons.
Thoughts.
Yeah. Musings.
So the first thing I have here is identifying your opponent's game plan early and adjusting accordingly.
Mm-hmm. So like something easy, right, is if they flip over Raiden or if they flip over 2 sabers. You 100% know what they're doing.
Yep.
Right? So equipment can be a part of that. But then, you know, really making sure you track those like early pitches are really important to figure out what your opponent is doing, you know? Did they pitch the red pummel? Did they pitch a blue pummel? are they only pitching blues for their first couple of turns? Okay, probably just trying to play out all of their aggro cards and kill me before they get to those ones.
Right. And as soon as this happens, right, you have several decision points.
Right.
A, if they're pitching threats, can I kill them before they reach their pitch? Or do I need to pitch to counter or accommodate these threats?
Right.
Or if they're only pitching blues, can I survive long enough to pitch stack and have a more threat dense deck on the second cycle?
Yeah, and some of these things, right, like we just talk about this in general because some decks do not lend themselves to potentially the flexibility in game plans that we're talking about. But they could be something like, oh, they're playing control into my aggro deck. Okay, so I can set up kind of bigger turns to kind of go over the top, right? Rather than like, well, we'll just see what happens. Hopefully I win, stuff like that. And of course, like some game plans are much more linear than others, and you still want to do the same thing all the time, but just knowing what your opponent potentially is trying to do is way better for you, giving you potentially a chance to win that match, rather than being like, I think they're doing, just being like, whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever is not a great
game plan.
Yeah. Or just kind of a great way to explain it. But I think my point has been made.
Yeah, a good example of this is when you're playing against Katsu, right? You don't know if it's aggro or control. Mm-hmm. Based on the meta, you can guess and you can hedge board, but you don't really know until they start playing. And your strategy will vary quite a lot. If they're playing aggro Katsu, you need to pressure them and try to strip cards, right? And block efficiently, etc. But the opposite's kind of true. If they're playing control, you can't just throw your threats at them because they're happy to block, and you'll waste all the resources in your deck just getting blocked out. So you need to either block some and apply some pressure, or you need to build bigger turns to go over the top and make them leak damage,
right.
Which are like, I like the Katsu example because your strategy into each one is like vastly different. And when you approach that hero, you don't know what they're doing. So
yeah, because the equipment's even the same,
right.
Basically. I mean,
so
I guess they could
adjust
flip
on
over
the fly.
Breeze Riders, right? Then you're like, oh, control Katsu, right? Or mid-range Katsu, know. But even then, you could still have Snapdragons and be in that archetype. Okay, so let's skip. Well, maybe not. Okay, so we also have in here identifying when your opponent is trying to hold on to their hand or they're happy to block. So how would you change your gameplay pattern? Let's say you come up against your opponent that is happy to just like take the damage, and you have one card left you can play. I think this happens a lot. So you could get in an extra 4 damage. Do you do that and forego your arsenal for the extra 4 life lead, or do you arsenal that card knowing your opponent is holding on to 4 cards in an arsenal and hasn't blocked your turn and maybe has taken like 15 damage?
Well, I would say this is a bit dependent on the type of a pressure you could apply, right? Like sometimes situations will come up where you can kind of blow your whole hand and end with no arsenal and, end your chain with a command and conquer, right? If they are, so say you play out your first attack, vanilla damage, 5, go again, whatever, and they're just happy to take it. And then you play something else out that, say you play a Mauve Skies into something and they still take it. They just really want to hold these cards to swing back at you.
Then I would say, like Hamish does, you fool. You don't want to win this game? Okay, anyway, go ahead.
And but then so you may be faced with an option of swinging Rosetta and arsenaling Command and Conquer, or pitching it, swing Rosetta, arsenaling something else, or maybe you can play out your Command and Conquer and have no arsenal.
Right.
I think in that situation, it's better to recognize what your opponent's trying to do and play the Command and Conquer, because then they have to adapt and they can't just hold their hand.
Right. Or at least lose their arsenal card.
Right.
And take 6 more damage.
And if the inverse is also true, right? Like if they just, if you just play out, 5 go again to start and they just drop 2 cards instantly, right? They might be trying to hold one of those cards to arsenal, or they might be trying to hold 2, but it seems like they're fairly happy. They didn't deliberate. They just dumped their cards. So then you can read that, okay, they're happy to get rid of their cards. Maybe I'm playing against Dorinthia, and I know she's not very threatening with 1 or 2 cards, right? So I'm going to apply some pressure. I'm going to swing my weapon, but I'm going to make sure I'm well set up for next turn, and I'm going to save that arsenal.
Right. So your opponent doesn't block. You have 1 card left. Do you play it, or do you arsenal it? And it's not Command and Conquer. It's just whatever the card is, you use it either to swing your weapon for 4 more damage, or it does 4 more damage.
So there's a few factors. If you have enough equipment up to stop most crush effects, there's other factors here. But in this scenario, like we talked about earlier with Briar, I'm going to arsenal that.
Right.
Because you're just banking damage for next turn, and increasing the consistency of your next hand. I guess what I'm more talking about is just if you have the ability to apply more pressure to their hand versus setting up for next turn. But if it's just 4 damage or a card in arsenal, I'm just going to save it. It'll be 4 damage next time.
Yeah, I think that is also the correct play. I think a lot of times, unless you get them to a threshold that where you can strip their cards next turn, like they go to 3 health or something, with that extra hit, then that maybe is valuable. But if they're still at something like, if they go from 30 to 15, and you and the difference is between 15 or 19 damage, those are basically the same thing, because it's unlikely your 4 cards are going to be able to strip all of their cards the next turn while taking the damage from their 5 card hand. So arsenaling that card and kind of ensuring that you could maybe play with 2 or 3 cards is way better. And you see that a lot. I would see that in the chain meta a lot. They would do try to do a little extra damage and not have an arsenal card in the mirror
when it's available.
And you're like, no way, I'm gonna have an arsenal card more often than you, and we're gonna win this matchup.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And so even if you arsenal that card and have to dump your whole hand blocking their answer, you're still better set up for when you choose to pivot later in the game, for sure.
Definitely. How about identifying their arsenal? How do you identify their arsenal? That's the real question. Or can you even identify what's in their arsenal?
I think there's pretty good tells, right? If Bravo arsenals a card and you come at them, with Snatch for 7, and they block with 3 cards from hand or some armor and 2 cards, or say you come at them with a red leg tap or whatever, it's just them foregoing the efficiency of a 4 block free defense reaction is fairly unlikely, right? It would just be much, much more efficient for them to just use that defense reaction. So if you're playing red leg tap and they're not blocking with a defense reaction, I would bet they have some sort of combo card or offensive card in their arsenal.
Right. Yeah. How do you identify if it's a defense reaction, though?
Oh, gotcha.
So I would say, if they had a chance to, if we use Bravo, for example, and it's a tough scenario, they hammer swing for 6 with 2 floating, 1 card left in hand. Mm-hmm. And you block some of it or all of it or whatever, and they choose not to play that last card.
Yeah.
It still could be the pummel, right? But it very well could also be just a defense reaction and they're baiting you out, or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. That's a very good example.
Yeah, so just recognizing like, ooh, if that was one more card to punish me with, could it be a defense reaction in this particular matchup that I know that there could be defense reactions?
Right.
Right.
Like, that's weird they didn't play that card out.
Yeah.
When it would have punished me. And
maybe
instead they just arsenaled.
Yeah, probably a better example is like on some card that has a crush effect with 2 floating, and they decide to arsenal it when you've only shown that you're willing to block part of it or something, which is kind of a ballsy maneuver anyway. But but which also leads me into making sure you're trying to think about both sides of the table. So thinking about your opponent's turn and why they would sequence their play the way that they did can really help you identify what potential cards or threats or non-threats that they have in their hand, or how, and that can help you make a better decision on what you should do with other parts of your turn, or defend with or whatever,
Yeah, just help you weigh your exchanges. Like if you attack me with a card and no go again and have 3 cards in hand, I'm all right. So maybe you had a terrible hand, but odds are you're going to creepers me and then continue on for more. So I have to think about, what if you do that?
Yeah.
What's that turn look like then?
Or maybe there's a razor attack reaction, snapdragons are up, trying to figure out why they sequenced the way they did is really important, like non-attack action into an attack with a rune chant and it has go again, do I take the rune chant? Did they sequence it this way by making that rune chant because they have an arcane trigger, like a meet and greet that's going to hit later down in the chain, or is the next card or something? If I do use a whole card for that arcane, how much does it punish me if that's not the case, or if that is the case, or,
right.
Weighing those things can really help you out in identifying why your opponent sequences that. Like when you're in your testing group, I do it all the time. I just like talk the line out like to my opponent, like, oh, okay, so you have this, you did these things, so potentially these last 2 cards could be this. How do I feel about that? Okay, I'm okay with that. If it's that, I don't feel okay about that.
Yeah.
And I, most of the time, try to err on assuming the worst, because if you don't and you're like, well, it's probably not this, and they blow you out, it's just like the worst feeling ever. And you really can't afford those scenarios.
Right.
If you're trying to still win.
Which is a tough thing to weigh, because sometimes you have to take that little bit of risk to, it's like, well, if you blow me out, you win. But if I overblock here, I have no chance of winning. So that's a tough thing to weigh there. But I like that example of the crackle, because that kind of ties into another point we have on making your opponent make tough decisions, right?
Yeah.
Like if you shackle, play crackle, you're begging the question, are you going to give me a whole card to block this one arcane and turn off the meet and greet I might have? Right. And that's really, really tough on your opponent, because they might pitch a blue thinking, okay, I'll have some floating for the next arcane coming in, but maybe that's not your line.
Yeah.
Maybe you're just fishing for that, and then then maybe you play Shadow Puppetry Command and Conquer instead, and they're like, well, that sucks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so if you're thinking about your opponent's way of sequencing, you can reflect on how you sequence your turn, and if you can afford to present a similar turn but in a different way, that might make it a little bit tougher on your opponent to identify what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying to do this in lieu of 3 less points of damage or that sort of thing, because that's 3 points of damage you just should have probably done instead, and that's like strictly better. But just starting to think about the way in which you sequence you can try to bait your opponent into inefficiencies that aren't there. Or it could be the exact thing you wanted. Like maybe you really do want them to like pitch for that arcane, which is great because you're like, cool, I have this next attack and then I have this other thing that's going to give this other thing go again. And so I just needed you to just get rid of a card or, lose to this damage. That's called checkmate, by the way.
Yeah, and I think a good example of it is in Lexi, right? Sometimes if you're choosing go again on Voltaire instead of +1, your potential bluff is only costing you 1 less damage, right? But then it's making your opponent have to decide whether you're going to go wide or tall, right? Whereas if you just gave your arrow +1, you don't get to bluff the follow-up arrow, and you're only 1 damage more, right? So then in that situation, sometimes it's worth it to forego just 1 damage in order to make your opponent make a tougher decision.
Yeah. Definitely. Man, we're really burning through these. Did you realize that?
Oh, are we?
Yeah.
Good.
That's okay. Okay, so this one I think is one of my big ones, and we're going to talk about armor here for a second. And I feel like so many people have talked about armor or equipment and its importance, and I still see people just throwing them willy-nilly to the wind. Like in one of my rounds of Swiss, in one of the RTNs during the Monarch meta, I was in the chain mirror, and it was like turn 2. My opponent just gave up the husk because there was like, I think it was probably soul reaping, right, with Go Again or something, or Command and Conquer. I can't remember. Just something where he could efficiently block it and he could just save himself 6 damage. Command and Conquer might have been pretty good, but if it's like soul reaping and it's only turn 2 and there's no plunder run or hit effects or anything before that, then it's like not a great target to use one of your best pieces of equipment in that particular matchup, and it was just because it was efficient. He could block all 6 and keep his life total potentially higher than mine in the moment, right?
Yeah.
But as the game went on and I came in with slightly bigger attacks, and now your health total is a little lower, you really can't afford to take damage now, and you have to start giving me cards out of your hand. So now your offensive turns are way more manageable for me.
Yeah,
right.
Definitely. I mean, just think of your armor as like part of your life, right? Like I have 40 life, but I really have 50 life, just 10 of it sitting over here. And it's even better because it blocks hit effects.
Yeah.
But yeah, you see that all the time. Like, a player is trying to hold their hand, right? So like ideally 12 damage, and you just take it all trying to hold your hand, and then I come in with another 6 damage, and you're like, your brain just can't take 18 damage on a turn to hold this hand, so you block with your equipment to mitigate some of that damage and to make yourself feel better.
Right.
Well, I actually only took 12 this turn because I used equipment to dampen some of it. But your equipment is exactly like your health in most situations, right? That's just the worst use of it, just to make yourself feel better about your decision tree.
Yeah.
That's not the time to use your armor.
Yeah, there's a huge difference between, and you have to you really do have to train yourself this. There's like a big difference between damage and damage that has an effect.
Yeah.
Like drawing a card or crush effects, stuff like that. And the later you can save your armor to stop those things, the better chance you have to win the game, right? Because it's just an exchange of, at this point when life totals are lower and each point of life matters a bit more than it did previously, I can keep a card to push more damage, and you will not be able to because your armor is gone. Right?
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
And this goes into not just armor, but also knowing what specific purpose each piece of equipment actually serves, right? Like an early use of Snapdragon scalers could also cost you the game because you're doing the like, well, they're holding onto their cards. I'll snap this and deal 4 more damage. And so now there's a bit more of a gap and they still don't block. And now I feel like I'm really ahead. But oh no, here comes like, some big attack with the hit effect. And I now have to just take this damage also. And I don't have my Snapdragon scalers and my opponent still has all their armor. Now you're like way behind.
I'm guilty of wanting to break my snaps too early. It's just so fun.
Nice.
It's like I broke it and then I swung a bunch more and stripped even more cards. But now I don't have it.
Yeah.
And I have tempo, but we both still have 38 life,
Yeah,
it's not a good play.
Man, that could be a whole episode. Is like, what is tempo?
Yeah.
Or momentum.
Maybe it will be.
Yeah. How to get it, how to lose it, why you want it.
Totally. It's definitely the most interesting aspect of this game, I think. But on the armor point, I will point out that certain pieces of armor kind of beg to be used earlier, right? Like Bloodsheath, Skeleta, or your boots and warrior, or Barkbone strapping, or certain armor that breaks when you use the ability on it, and you want that ability available soon. You might consider blocking with that to get the armor efficiency before you then break that equipment.
Right, that makes sense.
But you can still use the armor to break a pertinent or block a pertinent hit effect.
Right.
Instead of just vanilla damage. Just try to hold it and then recognize when it's a good opportunity to use it before you're going to. Because otherwise, sometimes you'll be in a position where you're like, well, God, I gotta break Skeleta next turn, so I gotta use the armor this turn. But I'm just using it kind of inefficiently to block 2 vanilla damage because I need to break it, which is not the end of the world. But it would have been better to use it 2 turns ago to stop that hit effect. So keeping that in mind throughout the game, I think, is important.
Yeah, exactly. Because, sometimes you do win the game when you don't block with that thing and then use it later at an opportune moment. But that's still like a tiny efficiency that may make the difference in a later game. So getting those habits earlier is much better.
And there's always since we're just talking about armor,
There's
always you always have to weigh getting the best use of your equipment versus saving it for the end game, right? Like it's almost never good to just use it early, but also you don't need to save all of it till you have 4 life left to then capitalize on it, right? Sometimes it's okay to break some of it when you have 20 life if you truly seize tempo, stop their turn, and that's probably the moment where you win the game. So I think kind of recognizing, okay, I need to save this for when I need it, but using it when you need it rather than just kind of always sticking to the rule of thumb where I just I have to not use my armor. I have to save it for later. Right. There's a little bit of a balance there.
Yeah, and that kind of dovetails into some of our other points. But one thing I do want to mention is that sometimes when we get into these what-if scenarios, or especially the one Isaac just mentioned, to get to that point, it still takes a lots of practice, lots of reps, and comes with time. You don't just go right into I can see what the next 5 turns are going to look like if I do this here, right? That just it takes a bit more experience, which leads me into, what was it going to lead me into? Oh, knowing your win condition, right? So that's nice. What it leads me into. So if okay, these are the things that are left in my deck, they're at this health total. If I use snaps right now for this extra 4 damage, I have plenty of stuff to keep up the pressure, even if I take their whole turn, right, or whatever. I can still come out on top after this, even if you use kind of a key piece, kind of maybe in the mid game to force your opponent into the late game. Is just you knowing what your win condition is versus that matchup.
Yeah.
Right.
Versus your opponent's win condition.
Yeah.
Right. Definitely.
Yeah.
And sometimes you'll have multiple objectives to your win condition, right? Like some are fairly linear. If you're playing control dash, you're just blocking as efficiently as possible, with the exception of when you can get an item out in play and firing your pistol off, and that can be a brutally efficient win condition. And that's all you're doing almost every game, right? But certain games, have a bit more of a complex win condition, and you'll learn the intricacies of that the more reps you get on that deck. But like, I'll just use Ice Lexi into Briar because I'm like pretty familiar with that matchup. It's still it's like a really tough matchup, right? And you have there's several components to your win condition of that game, right? Like objective 1 is to strip some of their cards and work through their armor, right? But you're going to take damage here, but you need to maintain pressure. You're going to go down on life, and you're going to work your way through their armor. You do have to block every once in a while. Like if you can't afford this arrow, use it to block their red ball lightning. Then once their armor is used up, you're going to set up this pivot turn, right? You're down on life. They have embodiments. You need to apply pressure and work your way up to this turn where like maybe they don't have an arsenal and they have 1 embodiment. Okay, now I'm going to take 10 more damage and I'm going to gain tempo because now they don't have armor, they don't have embodiments, or they have 1 embodiment or whatever. They don't have a 5-card hand, they just have a 4-card hand. Maybe I'm down 12 or 15 life now, but this is where I can seize the moment and win the game, right? So you identify and create that tempo turn, which can be multiple, or that pivot turn, which can be multiple turns in a row, right? Like if I'm not set up to do it right now, okay, I block a bit, then I play an arrow with 2 hit effects for 7, I get an arsenal card. Or maybe I set up a 6-card hand with a bit of pressure. And then the next turn, I ask them the question, well, can you do anything and still arsenal? No. So you're going to just play out your hand and then not have an arsenal, and I'm like well set up. And then after that, you've pivoted and then you have tempo and they can't get it back and you win. But it's like when you go into that matchup, it feels like you have no effect on their hand because they just block for a lot. They deal way more damage than you, and they can just block your hit effects with their armor. So you like lose the first half of that game, maybe 2/3 of that game, almost every time. And it's like pretty rough. But knowing the steps to your win condition makes you more comfortably to, I guess, make the right calculations or decisions when you're just bleeding damage,
Right.
And so you can make the right decisions anyway when it appears that you're just losing and playing a poor game, I guess.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's an excellent summation.
And not all decks have that many steps or whatever, but, I use that as an example to like, maybe it's not 1 win condition. Maybe it's,
Yeah, I'm trying to do this early, trying to do this in the mid part, and then at the end of the game, if I've done A, B, I should be set up for C.
Yeah.
That type of thing.
And I watch you play Viscerai against me sometimes, and it's kind of scary because you just like bring the pressure. It's like 3 cards threatening 12 damage, and you're like, God, this sucks. And then you leak some damage, and then you pivot, and then you block and start building rune chants, and then I'm like even more terrified now,
Yeah. Yeah. And this also could be like maybe a whole episode too, is like identifying or knowing how to pivot and knowing when your opponent wants to pivot are kind of really crucial. One of the easiest ways to do it is if you play a character with a bunch of armor, you can just kind of, thin your deck by blocking, chip in damage as you go, play a mid-range game, and then you kind of wind up with like a hand of cards that really has a lot of gas, and you still have all your armor. And then you can just use all of your armor in one swift go against your opponent to stop whatever's going on as well as you can, keep your life total a little bit higher, and then swing back with like this rad combo of 5 cards that you have. And I wonder too, like, because we've played in like a Welcome to Wraith, Arcane Rising, just Crucible meta, where that was like kind of the move to do all of the time. If that comes a little bit easier for us than newer players who are like, I don't know, I'm playing characters that have no armor, I have the tunic. That's what I have, to block with. So in those circumstances, it's like much harder to kind of pivot, where you go from kind of being on the defensive and potentially being on the short end of all of the exchanges, to then your opponent is now, on the back foot and you're winning the exchanges. Understanding how to do that also takes some time and some testing and that sort of thing. But and there's multiple ways to do it, like health as a resource, right? If you can keep your life total really high until you've set up like, crippling crush into crippling crush into crippling crush, that's
the most demoralizing play to be on the other side of.
That's like the perfect, that's a really great example of like how to pivot as well, So in that circumstance, you actually might use your armor like super early just to ensure that you're at like 30 health when that happens or something like that,
and this pivot turn this pivot play can be like many turns, right? Like you might identify, okay, I just need to.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, that it's not one turn. It also could be 5 turns.
Right. Like say the start is, okay, I'm going to leak 3 damage to then play a card for 4, follow up with Rosetta for 4 or 5, because I need to get them from like 18 to 13 before I start the last part of my win condition, or, whatever it may be. And you're really good about.
Thank you.
About looking good. But also about weighing the need to arsenal a card, right? Like calculating my next hand. Do I really want to arsenal this card, or do I want to play it because it makes this hand X amount better, but then I arsenal this card that is like fine, but not as much a part of my endgame condition, or is it just better to block with it and wait for the card I really want to arsenal? And you definitely think about that every turn, which is a really good way to craft your end game plan, or to manufacture your pivot turn, is like, if I can make it so these 2 turns play out this way, then turns, 7 and 8 down the line will be more set up in my favor,
right,
to then implement the last part of my plan. Sorry if that's too abstract, but
I think maybe the point in that is just like, and you maybe learn this a little quickly, that not all cards are arsenal cards. Like they definitely try to tell you which one, like if this is played from arsenal, but then there's like another level of that because of what that card's role is in your deck in relation to which third of the game you are in, right?
Yeah.
Or which opponent you're against. Do you have certain pieces of armor or equipment or energy potion or rune chance or whatever out. And that sort of thing. Let us take a short break because I have to tinkle. And then we'll be right back with the last few bits of our tips, tricks, and flibbity jips. And we're back.
Nice. All right. So let's talk a little bit about... So it's difficult to not have tunnel vision in competitive play where you're on the clock.
Yeah.
So when you're playing casually, let's talk about ways that you can not get tunnel vision or practice not having tunnel vision when there's no clock. So you're better at observing the whole table when you're on the clock.
Yeah, so my big thing is I always set my cards down, And
yeah, great habit.
Yeah, totally. I just put them down, 1, 2, 3, 4. There we go. And then, I look over at the equipment. What's relevant over there? Are they running Tunic? Does it have its third counter on it? Do they have Snapdragons up? Okay, they're running Skullcap, still haven't used it, etc. And then just keep them down there as your opponent's turn goes on. Like, okay, they pitched this. They're playing this. Here's the attack. Okay. Don't pick up your cards yet. Talk about think about what we just talked about. Why are they sequencing their turn this way? Think about it and then pick your cards up. It makes it a lot easier for you to be able to think. Because I find a lot, personally, I look at my cards and I think about my turn strictly, not my opponent's turn, And you can tell when your opponent has been doing that, thinking about their turn, when you play the card and say what it does, right? And then you wait, and then they look at their cards some more, and then they're like, okay, so you're coming in for blah, blah, blah. And it's like, oh, right, you weren't noticing anything on my side of the table as I was playing, which is fine. You can then also notice things that way at that point, but just a...
Yeah.
Little tip, little trick.
Definitely. Well, because it's easy when you're in a competitive game or you're feeling pressured because of the clock.
Yeah.
It's easy to just hone in on your 4 cards or your next turn, or the one attack they're playing out with the hit effect you really don't like, right? And only consider those and miss that.
Yeah.
Oh well, if I do take this, then actually my Skullcap will be on, so then I can block the follower, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And considering the whole table. And so that's something you have to do in practice, so that when it's time for game time, you're able to be aware of the entire setting.
Yeah, and it's definitely easier sometimes than other times. As soon as you get tilted, it's hard not to have tunnel vision and to get out of that,
Yeah.
And then that's a whole other topic, how to not get tilted, which also takes practice. It for sure took me a lot of practice to not get tilted. Because once I feel you get, or at least for me, once I got better at the game and was okay, I freaking know what I'm doing now. And then, it just doesn't go your way, or you're getting upset that you're losing or whatever, then you just start making stupid decisions and stuff,
Yeah, definitely. So. And I still sometimes get tilted, as I learned recently.
Oh yeah?
Yeah. But I think that's important also. That's a good tip. I think it's important, when you're playing a casual game or testing or whatever it is, to if you do get tilted, to stop and then make a decision once you've gotten over it. Once you're no longer tilted, try to just make a calculated decision, right? Because then there's no clock. You're just trying to learn. Yeah. So I'm tilted right now. I'm pretty annoyed. All right, let's not play this hand out until I'm over it, and then I can think about just the game state.
And setting your cards down can be part of that too, right? It's a calming effect. Okay, I'm upset. what's their equipment doing? What card did they pitch? And just say that in your mind and that sort of thing. And this kind of goes into like in these casual games, right? Like a classic, not a sportsism, but the sports model, right? Is that you have way more practices than you do games, and you always practice how you want to play in those games, And so that's like kind of the same thing. Like you can't just expect to gain all of these habits once the bright lights are on. You have to like develop them outside of that. So when the bright lights are on and, they come at you with scar for 12, 2 draw cards and arcane damage, that you don't just freaking lose your mind and, be like, whatever, no blocks, or something stupid.
Yeah.
Or I don't know. You know what I mean? You don't make the right decision in that point,
Yeah.
Because that's not
Instead,
your habit.
you come with a plan.
Yeah.
And you correctly calculate your turn and you make the right decision.
Yeah.
Not God, how lucky you got or whatever.
Yeah.
This is stupid.
Yeah. Because when you're learning like a new skill, once you become under pressure or fatigued, you revert to whatever your habit kind of is.
Oh yeah, that's a great sports sports science hot tip.
Yeah.
Great job.
Thanks. It's like well educated or something. So if you haven't developed those habits beforehand, you're just gonna revert to what you know, right? Like I think most famously, well, maybe not most famously, but in my circle, most famously, like NBA players on draft night or like leading up to the draft, like rookies or whatever, they go and do workouts with different NBA teams or whatever. And like the first 30 to 45 minutes of the workout is just to exhaust the player, right? So you do all of this misdirection stuff where it's all just like lots of running. It's all really hard. And then they get into more highly skilled drills or situations or that sort of thing, because they want to scout you when you're tired and know what your actual habits are. Because of course you can do what anybody wants when you're like, your brain's fresh and you're like ready to go,
Yeah, but when it's game time and you're exhausted, they want to see how you'll perform.
Fourth quarter, 2 minutes to go.
Yep.
Etc. Okay. We got one more, I think, point here before we get into our signature segments.
Sure, and this is a topic that could also take a whole podcast or a lifetime, really. But, let's talk about your ego in the game a little bit.
Psh, what ego? I don't got an ego. You have an ego. I'm not crying. You're crying.
I'm not being defensive.
Yeah, you are.
My ego's not offended.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. My truck is regular sized. It's not compensating. Anyway, so...
Well, I'm glad we got that discussion out of the way.
Yeah,
let's move on to our...
I feel lighter now that I've gotten all that off my chest. Okay, so taking your ego out of the equation, right? Talk to me about that, Isaac.
All right. So this can manifest in a number of ways. Since we started with testing in the pod first, I'll talk about testing. So it's like pretty demoralizing sometimes to get just like walloped, right? But recently in testing, I've like beat the living shit out of people and had the living shit kicked out of me.
Yeah.
But, you're like playing a matchup where I'm trying this new idea to beat this poor matchup for me or whatever, and it didn't work. And that's fine. I learned that, and it like said nothing about me or, my identity or my opponent or anything, right? Like we're just testing this new idea into this matchup. We'll keep doing it until we find something that works, or we'll shift to, a different character or whatever. That's like all it is. It had nothing to do with you beat me or I beat you. And, right. We don't really have too much of an issue with this kind of thing, but it's just in the moment, right? Like I don't think I ever really take offense or anything, but in the moment after you've just been like beat 3 times straight and your ideas fell flat and didn't work at all, and you just like lost a bunch, it can be a little demoralizing even if you're like fine afterwards. So, cheer up. It's fine.
Because what was it really? Did you just have like some bad play? Easily fixable. Did you have a bad idea for a deck? Easily fixable.
Yep.
Does your bad idea for a deck define you? No. Does your play define who you are? No way. And if you think, oh yeah, it totally does, then it's going to be pretty devastating when you lose, Mm-hmm. And can you handle that would then be the question, So just making sure that you like keep yourself in check, right? Like this is just a game, and it could be more than a game to you, and that's totally fine. But your experience or your actions affect other people's experiences as well, right? So it's not just about whether you won or lost. There's another person who won or lost across the table, right?
Yeah, that is a very good point. And you're still responsible for how you behave towards another human being at all moments in your life, even if you're frustrated.
Yeah. And it for sure sucks to lose,
Yeah.
It for sure does, especially when, this game does mean something to you, and how you perform means something to you, but keeping in mind that like it probably is the same for the other person, right? And if you need to like be mad or upset, you don't need to let your opponent know you're mad or upset, right? Because you don't want to take away from what they just accomplished, which was, beating you.
Yeah.
And then you can put your ego back into it and be like, hey, you beat me. That's an accomplishment. You know what I mean?
Nice little crisscross.
Yeah, crisscross there.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I've had players, really, really tell me how they fucking threw the game away or blew it, or how lucky I got, or all these things.
Yeah.
And like it's just like a little bit embarrassing. But I personally, I'm like pretty self-competitive, so if I kind of like blow a high level game or don't like perform how I would have liked to, it definitely can be a bit disappointing. But I think just keeping reasonable expectations for yourself, or like acknowledging like, yeah, I played poorly there and I fucked that up, but it's like you're and I'm just speaking for myself, this is different for everybody, but I mean, you kind of have a choice, right? Like you can either be all pissed off and like blame a lot of exterior factors, or like be mad at the world, or just like whatever, or you can identify what happened, improve your play, and, come back at it again a different time. It's like really your choice whether you're, bitter and upset, or you're just, a bit disappointed and choose to learn and, move on. Yeah,
definitely. I as a extremely competitive person with myself and with others, me and you, Isaac, play a ton of games, and you have beat me hundreds of times, and I still hate it. I still hate losing to you, but I've gotten better at being okay with that, and I'm sure we know each other so well, you can like tell when I'm like bummed you beat me, or whatever.
Definitely.
And vice versa too.
You've also beat me hundreds of times.
Yeah, and I try not to like let that affect our matches post game and that sort of thing. But this is another sports analogy. So as I had this revelation like partway
New Year revelation, New Year's revelation. No,
what?
Never mind. I was trying to tie it all together.
Totally. But those are resolutions, not revelations.
Oh, we were doing both.
Oh, okay.
Remember?
Oh, shit. Okay. Well, I can't.
All right.
long ago.
What's your revelation?
So there was a partway through my like mid 20s as I was playing basketball. I was like, I'm gonna like one day get older, and I won't be able to just like sprint up and down the court and like, you know, score as well as I do at the rim. So I am gonna have to like continue to provide value if I want to play this as I get older by like becoming really good at shooting from the outside, because then I like risk no chance of blowing out my knee like trying to do a layup when I shouldn't be doing that because I'm like getting too old, right? And so I started like really practicing like outside shooting way more, and that gets like pretty frustrating at some point because you'll like go on streaks where you just like miss a lot or you're like not very good or whatever. But what I started turning all of that into is just like missed shots wind up being just data points, right? Like, oh, I didn't have my feet set, ball was short, move a little bit quicker so the ball has like a little bit more distance on it, etc. Right? They're all just like data points. Next one's going in. And so I think you can use that in Flesh and Blood as well. Like, there is the only thing that's going to go for you to not be able to play this is if you become like too elderly and senile, which hopefully for many of us is like a long time away. So you have plenty of time to improve at this game. So each loss is just another data point, right, on your way to mastery. And so I try to keep that in my mind as well, right?
Yeah.
Is that like...
That's a good point, to keep a kind of a macro perspective.
Yeah.
When like this game is really important to me right now, but it's also just part of my training or my journey.
It's like step 100 on 5,000.
Right.
You know, I have 4,900 more steps to go till, you know, my brain withers away and I no longer know where or who I am. So that's totally fine.
I hope to pass away before I reach that point.
Right. Also, I hope I definitely play more than 5,000 games.
Yeah.
You know, that would come up a little bit too fast at the pace I'm going. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think it's just like it's not easy to like manage your ego, and this isn't necessarily gameplay related, but I guess that we just like had this point because it's like life becomes a lot easier, you know, if you kind of reasonably try to, like, if you begin to make the effort to, you know, God, I don't know how to phrase this. Just be, you know, aware of and in touch with your ego and your behavior and shortcomings and, you know, thought processes. It's just like, instead of being in bitter, staunch denial, if you just like try to make the effort to take some of these steps, it just makes for a much happier life.
Yeah.
While playing a game or wherever your, you know, competitive side comes out.
We call that a staunch response.
Nice.
To tie that all up, like, your self-worth is not defined by your play.
Yeah.
And you're winning or losing. Your self-worth is defined by how well you treat the other people you're around. So like the TOs, the people on your left and right during Swiss, your opponent, your friends you came with, your testing mates, etc., right? That's how your self-worth is like for sure defined. Yeah. Not if you win the Pro Quest or not.
Yeah.
You know?
And it can be also, you know, how well you learn from situations.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, definitely.
All right.
Sweet. Nailed it. Slayed it.
Perfect. Well, we're very good at these kinds of things. Sorry, a little ego.
Totally. Nobody can tell me otherwise. My truck is a regular size. It's regular. It's not too large. Compensating for stuff. I don't even have a truck. No, that's true. Not true. I do have one. Okay. Thank you all for coming to this episode. We have our signature segments. First up is Riddle Me This with Isaac, where he talks about some card He just has no idea about anything about it.
What is this card?
Yeah, totally.
This episode's Riddle Me This is... I've been doing a lot of Kano stuff lately, so sorry to all of the, Data Doll fans out there. But...
yeah, come on, bro.
We'll work our way around. Anyway, this episode's Riddle Me This is Rousing Aether, right? So this card makes the next wizard attack this turn deal 1 additional damage. And it just seems like at face value, this card is not as good as, Aether Spindle.
Was it cost? Cost 2?
Cost 2, swings for 4, and then the next card you play deals an additional damage. Mm-hmm. So just at face value, it's like Voltic Bolt is just better because it does the same thing on its own, without having to play another card. And Spindle does something on its own, just a way better effect. I mean, there's scenarios I can think of where using Rousing Aether is good, right? Like you play Rousing and then you play Aether Flare, and that would be better to have one tacked on than just the one on Rousing. And then you play Blazing or something, but that's just like too much, in practice. I guess I was just trying to think, sorry, this is a bit rambly. I was just trying to think of a real world case scenario where this card, the effect of this card is like consistently beneficial. Like it's worth running it to pull this off. And I just don't know. So that's my Riddle Me This.
Cool.
Do you have any input to Rousing Aether, or is it just design space that hasn't seen the light of day yet?
I think so.
Yeah.
There's like tons of those cards in the game right now for like every class. Unifying Decree. Right? Attack reaction nobody does anything with, and it's a majestic.
Is it?
Yeah.
It's a majestic?
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So there's, hopefully with Everfest, something happens. I also want to put out this caveat that whatever you believe is going to happen in Everfest, LSS is not going to have that happen. Okay? So just curb your expectations now.
They're like 100% in that department.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of surprising us.
Yeah. If we look back at the data and if you've kept track of what your thoughts were about how stuff was going to happen, it has not happened that way at all. And I don't know of anybody who was like, called it. You know, did not happen.
Yeah, it's never happened.
So it's just all stay.
Good hot tip.
Stay chill.
Yeah.
Stay chill.
All right. Our next segment coming up is Taylor's Pick, Pass, Pray.
All right. So draft scenario. I'm going to give you 3 cards. One you're going to pick, another you're going to pass, and the third one you're going to pray comes back around. We should do this on YouTube also because Isaac's dance moves are incredible. Okay.
Well, just the rhythm of
Bam, bam, bam. First card up, Ragamuffin's Hat. A generic head equipment, blocks for nothing, has a cool dude with a fun hat and smoking a pipe at potentially Everfest. And it reads, instant, destroy Ragamuffin's Hat. Draw a card, then put a card from your hand on the top or bottom of your deck. Activate this ability only if you have 1 card in hand. Our second card, Cold Wave, is a elemental ranger action arrow attack. It's the red pitch, so it makes 1 resource, costs 1, defends for 3, attacks for 5, and it has ice fusion. If Cold Wave was fused, cards and activated abilities cost opposing heroes an additional resource this turn. Also, very cool ice bow art. Third card, Frostfang, is an ice action attack. Yellow, pitches for 2, costs 2, defends for 2, but attacks for 4. If Frostfang hits a hero, they discard a card unless they pay 2 resources. Also, gigantic Ice Wolf with antlers of ice. Freaking cool. All right, Isaac, which one are you going to pick, pass, and pray comes back around?
Boy, this is a tough one. I'm going to pick Frostfang. Yellow. Don't love it because if you use it to fuse and then arsenal it with Lexi, then you're like stuck with that and like you have to play it out with no go again and don't get to fire an arrow that turn. So that's pretty tough. But on said turn, you would give them a frostbite and then threaten a card strip with a breakpoint, which is pretty good, I guess. Not really the strategy I tend to go with Lexi, but also in Oldheim, it's just not that great. Doesn't pitch. Just listen to the reason it's not good.
Even though you're picking it.
Yeah. But it is an ice card. It is an attack with a breakpoint. I'll take it. And then I'm going to pray that Cold Wave comes back around. This card does next to nothing. It does counter Oldheim's reaction, right, or whatever, because it would cost them 2 cards to like deny you an arsenal or to block. So it's not terrible, but it's just not a great arrow. But it is a red arrow, and it synergizes to some degree with Frostfang, just being both in the ice realm, and maybe you're constructing your Lexi deck, and you just could use another red arrow. Ragamuffin's Hat, I'm going to pass on. I think it can have value in fixing your arsenal once per game, or, you don't want to arsenal this card, so fishing for a new one. However, it takes the armor slot of a headpiece you want instead. So I would much rather have Honing Hood or Plume of Evergrowth there, which is what has stopped me from grabbing it. If this was like the foot slot, I would take that. But
yeah.
All right. What's your take on these cards?
Oh, gosh, I don't even know. I chose these because I was like, this is going to be really interesting, but it's just kind of really painful.
As illustrated by my ineloquent slog through the decision process.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so I think, God, I kind of want to pick Ragamuffin's Hat first.
Sick.
Just because if I'm going to pick a red arrow first pick, I would rather it be a better one than Cold Wave, And then Frostfang just really, it's okay, right? It's like just okay. At least it's yellow, so you can pitch it for stuff and comes in at a break point later. But 2 for 4 is pretty rough. Yep. And there's like a scenario where you can like pick Cold Wave and, maybe there's no more red arrows in the pack. So they're like, whoa, this pack has no red arrows. There's no Lexi. So in like hoping to cut your opponent off from Lexi, and then in pack 2, they like pass you all the good Lexi cards, right? That could be a strategy.
Good point.
But then maybe like as the packs go on, you have to keep picking red arrows. So I'm going to pick Ragamuffin's Hat because it is non-committal and I can just pick a better headpiece if I get one later anyway. So it keeps me open and I can read some more signals and see if Ice and Lexi is really open, since these are 2 cards that are like not that bad that are left in here. So I'm going to kind of pray that Cold Wave comes around, because then maybe I'll get some like Lexi signals that way. And I'm just going to pass on Yellow Frostfang because it just is not like a card I really need in any deck I would really want to play. And Ragamuffin's Hat has like uses sometimes, and like upgrading your arsenal card, which can be like pretty useful in the format when tempo and momentum is like kind of everything. So that's my choice. Pick
nice.
Ragamuffins, pray for Cold Wave, pass on Frostfang.
I think you are correct. I like your choices.
I think you say that every time.
Well, I do think that because you may not have a headpiece that comes around, and Ragamuffins is better than having nothing, whereas the other cards are not that great. So,
yeah,
nice
and
way to work through that.
And replaceable, right? You could have a better ice card with a hit effect, and you can have a better red arrow.
Yeah.
Right? So, yeah.
Nice.
That's what I'm going with. All right. Final segment is board game
from the closet. Oh, we're not saying it together.
Oh, sorry.
So here at the Attack Action Podcast, we play a lot of board games in addition to Flesh and Blood. We enjoy very many of them, and sometimes we like to share one with you. This is not the best board game in the world. It may not be our favorite, but it's one we think you may enjoy. And this episode's, I always want to say this week's. We don't make a weekly podcast.
Totally.
This
who has time for that?
This episode's board game from the closet is Nephotafel.
Woo! Nailed it.
Thanks. Which is some people call Viking Chess. Now, a good friend of ours, through this game, homemade us some of these boards and sent them to us for Christmas, which is really cool in of itself. But I've now played a few games of Viking Chess, and I find it really intriguing. It's like there's a defensive, it's like asymmetrical chess. There's a defensive side that starts in the middle of the board with a king and all of his guards, and he's trying to escape to one of the corners. And the other side is like four, I don't know, regiments of soldiers surrounding them, and they're trying to trap the king and not let him break out and escape. And it's the kind of game where on my turn, I try to start thinking about all the potential plays and all of the, trees that they open up, like all of the potential plays off of each potential play. And then my brain can't hold all of that in one thought. And I kind of like give up and go with my gut feeling based on where I got in that thought process. But I found it really intriguing. It gives me a lot to think about while I play it, and I think the asymmetrical aspect is like very, very interesting.
Nice.
So there you go, Viking Chess. If you like, I don't know, I kind of think if you like chess, you'll like this game. I very much like chess, and I like Viking Chess now. So thanks, Mike.
Yeah, shout out to Mike, Thor Mike, a.k.a. Radiant Mike, a.k.a. newly married Mike. AKA the mic in our hearts. Okay, anyway. Well, that's pretty much our show. I do want to kind of update everyone on our Media Empire schedule. Perhaps should have done this at the beginning of the episode, but whatever. Who cares? We're here now and we're doing it. So you got this episode coming out here at the beginning of January. Happy New Year. And then kind of later in January, we're going to have another episode where we're going to talk about the results from the last countries to have nationals, assuming those are still going to happen. So New Zealand, Australia, and I think there's one more country. I can't remember. Maybe Malaysia. I'm unsure. Yeah. But we will be having a podcast detailing those metas and how that potentially is going to affect the pro quests coming up. Then we, on the 28th of January, have our very first spoiler.
Spoiler!
Woo! We don't know what it is yet. We should find out very soon. And so we will have a very fun... We have some great initial ideas on the board for what we're going to do for our video. So it'll be up on YouTube, our spoiler, and that'll be a part of the LSS schedule. So you can look forward to that. And then after that, we're going to have our month's reaction step to whatever the current spoiled cards are. And then that will take care of January. So we're really going to blast you at the end of the month. So make room in your schedule.
Yeah, look forward to that blasting.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
You know you love getting blasted by us. And then in February, right, the release happens. So, and then Pro Quest start. And so we'll be podcasting all about all that fun stuff.
Yep.
Yeah. It's a very exciting time. So,
yeah.
Yep.
Once again, we're very sorry for pushing you back out again. James White will try to get to you maybe in April.
Yeah, totally.
Our bad.
Yeah, James. If
a lot going on.
Yeah, go ahead. Send me a link to your calendar, and we'll try to see if we can coordinate something. I appreciate you reaching out to us all the time, Mr. White, Mr. James White, and appreciate that you listen to the podcast. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And then we appreciate you, the audience, for listening. Really, really appreciate it. That's our show. Enjoy this new outro. Remember, if you combine it with the intro, it makes a sonnet. Look for the secret haikus. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks, Taylor.
Thank you, Isaac.
Hey, thanks.
All right. Goodbye. Thank you for listening. You can find us on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram at the Attack Action Podcast. On Twitter, we are at BattleBro Taylor and at BattleBro Isaac. Shoot us an email, theattackactionpodcast@gmail.com.
If you would like to support us, like and subscribe, shop for singles using our affiliate link, or support our Patreon for as little as $4 per month.